Welcome everyone. This is the FX Masters Program, Lesson 3. Well, I hope you guys are enjoying the lesson so far. I haven't seen much activity yet on the groups, but I'm sure that you guys are, getting your hands onto the lessons and practicing it all. So far so good. Today we're going to continue then the conversation about Maya fields. Let's start playing a little bit with, just simple expressions and start recreating a couple more stuff. As far as the topics for the week, then let's just assume that we're, within this area of Maya Dynamics 1. Like I said, we're going to play with a few more of the Maya fields. And then on the next lesson, then we'll go ahead and then jump back to some more of the prototyping stuff. So perfect, let's go ahead. This model right here is going to be on the FTP server tonight, as soon as I finish the lesson. The model is rigged, so there is a little curve right here where you can grab it and manipulate the helicopter, rotate it and all, translate it. Because this is not an animation course, it's up to you how you want to move this thing around. It has a little expression on the propellers here, the rotors. So it kind of rotates like that. If you grab the little curve right here, then you have the speed of the rotor and just the translation and all that. Like I said, I'm not I don't care about the animation, what you do with the animation of the helicopter. I do have some textures for it. I'm not going to upload it on the server unless you ask me to it, because the thing is that when we did the UVs are all fine, I believe everything should be. Yeah, everything is mapped correctly. Like I said, I do have textures for some of the areas, but when we rendered this the first time, when we did this work, this was Igor and myself. We did this thing for a film that we were working on. Then we were rendering on Mentor Ray, and Mentor Ray is no longer supported by Maya, by Autodesk. So if I open the scene just like I had it back then and hit render, it's not going to work. So, it's up to you. But it's not a big deal, to be honest. You can apply just some simple materials and go for it. I'm just giving you the geometry so you can play with something. It looks cooler on the reel. If you're testing your effects against something, with a size that we can, relate to. So there you go. You can just play with it. We'll probably use it for other things. You're welcome to use it on all your testing and put it on your reel and all, because we created this thing, so perfectly fine. All right. So with that in mind, then we'll go ahead and start talking a little bit about fields, a bit more about fields. A couple of things that we can do. We can probably play a little bit with. Let me just open my browser here. And let's go ahead and look for some sample videos on YouTube. So let's just say, let's see the helicopter taking off. And let's see if we can have it. Oh, Jesus Christ. Perfect. And let me see if we can find something that, is on top of some kind of dirt ground or something. Maybe this one. I'm just gonna mute it. It's always interesting, it's always necessary to have reference on the effects that you're working on, and always try to do real reference of real actual videos of things, physical stuff happening. Don't, what I mean by this is don't try to relate exactly on a film or an effect that you saw in another movie, because it kind of, like I always say in my other videos on the FX Power User program, it's almost like a copy of a copy of a copy. So eventually, the quality starts to go down, and there's nothing more truthful than obviously the real deal, right? So this guy is taking off over some grass. I don't see anything special going on. Let's see if we can find something else. Of course, you will find any reference that you like, and try to, if you want to recreate something real, then it's fine. Let me just see. 1 second. Could be on the ground, it could be on the water. Let's see if we can find something from a film. Sorry, from real life footage. Not quite. Well, we'll start talking so I don't delay the class too much. We'll come up with something now. Just give it one more try, another page. Maybe this one. Well, that sounds good. This could work. It's like a third row. Yeah, perfect, in slow motion as well, even better. So here we go. So Shutterstock, oh, you can copy this link, but just go on Shutterstock. You can kind of solve the criteria if you want the same video. I'm not gonna pay $79 to download it, but there you go. Here it is. It's a simple stuff, and we're just starting. We're not gonna talk about fluids yet, and the best way to do this kind of stuff is with fluids. But there we go. We're gonna keep this video around just in case. So let's talk about this thing. So far we have used some simple fields. We have worked with the uniform field, we have worked with gravity, and we have placed turbulence, but we haven't really done much work with it. So let's go ahead and simply begin. So one thing, if you want to create particles on the ground that this helicopter is going to kick out just like dust, because I don't want to be repetitive and do these things over and over again, and I also want to teach you the value of recycling your old scenes, then why don't we just go ahead and import what we did last class. I'm going to import the lesson 2, which, if you remember, is the birds, the big group of birds that we did for the planet Earth prototyping lesson. So I'm going to import that. Perfect. So I know it's here. It's just very little because of the scales of the scene. So that's another reason why it's good to have this helicopter in here. Just so you're testing things in real scale. But that's not a problem. We have our outliner right here, and because we did everything thinking of an adaptation and ease of use, then we have something here with the master control, and we have a size. We have a width and a length. So let's go ahead and test it. So my width right now is set to 27. Let's say that I put it 10 times bigger. And you can see right now here is my emitter from that time, right? This is a ground plane, just simple ground plane that comes with a scene that I'm giving you. So nothing special. We could even hide it for now. So there we go. This is the one we're testing. So I'm gonna grab my control, and I know the 270 is not gonna cut it. Probably, I don't know, 700. And even that, I think, is too small. Don't go too crazy on the numbers here. Don't waste particles. So there we go. We'll start with 1,000 here, and let's say 1,200. This could work. And let's go ahead and move it. Perfect. This is a good way to begin, because we did all that work, and you did all that work. And why not reuse it? There's nothing wrong with this. We don't have to talk about surface emission again. I think it's perfectly clear by now. So perfect. Let's test this thing. So we have our control right here. We have a bunch of numbers. Let's just see what we have. Nothing to worry about. We'll test it. We don't see anything. Don't freak out. It's not like you're not emitting anything. It's just simply that I'm not displaying dynamics. You can see that right now under show, I'm just showing polygons and dynamics. I don't want anything else, cluttering my scene. So let's just rewind and hit play again. And here we go. Remember, this is what we had last week. And this is a good way to begin. In 1 minute, then you have something working. That's why it's always good to rename your things correctly. When we imported the scene, Maya added a prefix right here. You can see that he's adding the prefix of the previous, of the name of the file that we're importing. There's an option when you import. You don't have to use the namespace if you want. Just be careful, because if you import this setup multiple times, then it's always good to have a namespace just to differentiate this from other, you know, um, the other rigs that you're going to be bringing. So you don't have duplicate names and things like that. Don't worry about the you know, you can see that the things works, you know, right off the bat, um, even though it has a different name, because Maya, you know, updates the expressions for you. So if you go select the particles and go to the particle shape, and you go to the expression, you can see that Maya already adds the prefix that this thing was added, you know, that it was put into the notes when we imported them. So it's not a big deal. It might get ugly, you know. I just don't like this thing. So if you wanted to get rid, you can get rid of it and then just re-import this thing um, without the namespace. I'm not going to do it in this case because it doesn't really matter. The scene file that I'm going to be handing over is just a helicopter. I want you guys to do this, you know, from scratch. So perfect. I mean, just if you haven't created this tool if you haven't gotten to this lesson 2 and done the homework, then just go ahead and do it, and then import it, because we're going to be using this for many things. We're going to be adapting this little setup here. So the way we had it last week, it had some motion for, you know, a little motion for the birds. So probably it should still be here. There we go. So they're moving in that direction a little bit. That shouldn't be a problem for the effect that we're working on. But if you just want to get rid of it, then you know that you have here a sorry, let me see, variation, swarm height, swarm speed. Okay, right? And it's set to 0.1. If you put that to 0, then these guys are not going to move. Then perfect. All right, cool. We have that part taken care of. We have particles on the ground. So now, what do we do? You know, how do we work this thing out? Before I get into the rotation and some forces that we're going to be putting from the helicopter, I just wanted to quickly talk to you about the turbulence fields. Just a little bit more, because that's such a common field that we use, you know, all the time. And I think it's good to start talking about it right away. So I'm going to select the particles and I'm going to create a turbulence field. That is on my outliner. So it's right there. So the purpose of the turbulence field, and for the sake of this lesson, I'm just going to grab my particles and I'm going to disconnect any other forces that we have. So we just focus on the turbulence first. How do you do that? How do you disconnect forces? Remember, if you go to Windows and you go to relationships, and then you go to dynamic relationships, okay? Then you're going to get a list of fields, as well as collisions and other things later on that we're going to be working later. So for now, I'm just going to get rid of the uniform field, and I'm going to leave the turbulence that we just made, which is this one. So right now, there's only one force being applied here. So if just rewind and hit play, then not much happens. You remember that by default, the fields come up with attenuation. So that is out. Let's just test it. Let's just really put some force in here and see what it does. And for now, you know, we don't want any more distractions. Let's just hide the polygons and just stick to the particles. And let's give ourselves some more time in my timeline to work. And here we go. So it's doing just kind of a little bit. It's not doing much. I'm going to crank it up really, really big so you can really see what we're doing here. So turbulence is like noise, but it's a noise that you can control its frequency, and it's going to be very handy later on. So by default, a turbulence field will do this. Like I said, noise. And a turbulence field comes with a default frequency of 1, which is right here. So you get a magnitude and attenuation like any field, and you get a frequency. A good practice, and I find this in, you know, probably 80% of the particle work that I do. I tend to work with 2 turbulence fields, and this is also mentioned quite a few times on my FX Power user lessons. So if you want to get a bit more information, even more information than the one I'm giving you now, then go to level 1, Maya Dynamics 1 on the FX Power user. The examples with the rain and pretty much anything when I'm talking about particle goals and things like that, then as always, I always use two turbulence fields. And the reason behind that is that I tend to do a turbulence field that it has a low frequency, and we can always just name it, okay? So let's say turbulence field low, and I'll show you the effect, right? So I'm gonna take the frequency of this and I'm gonna put it very low. So let's just say start with 0.1, and let's see what it does. Right, still a bit noisy. Let's go ahead and lower it even more, 0.01. Okay, you can see a big difference now. Look at the pattern. And I can tell that you get already having ideas. I'm sure, because you know that's our brain. That's the way it works, right? We start seeing this thing, and we start thinking of other applications for this. So anytime you have some sort of a Harry Pottery or magical kind of particle movement, there's always going to be somewhere a low frequency turbulence field. I'm going to let it run a little longer. Okay, let me just zoom out. It's quite an interesting shape for, let's say, I don't know, some sort of molecules. I can think of, what else could it be? I don't know, neurons on the brain, probably, just thinking about these tendrils. The result that you're going to get, if you start lowering and lowering more your frequency, is going to be more tendrils. But it's a pattern that gets static. And let's actually just, it's better if you see it for yourself. So I'm going to grab this and I'm going to lower it even more. All right, let's see. Look at that. So you kind of see where this is going, right? So it's almost it's a wave. Think of it as a texture, for example, as a noisy texture, kind of like the one we use on the emitter on this system. And then we play with the frequency. We got more and more black spots and white spots. Well, same thing here. Right now, you get such a low frequency that you get in this curve, and it's almost displacing the entire thing at once. So that's very low, and we can start cranking it up. Let's just say, remember to make big changes, right? Don't, you know, if you really want to see results quickly. So there we go. Just grab it. And remember that this force right now with no attenuation is working at a universal level. Everywhere in the scene is going to have the same result. Okay, so you can see that this is, yes, it has tendrils and it's splitting around, but the pattern itself is not changing. So it's like a static noise where the particles are moving through. Very cool, very interesting work, you know, effect. We can you can see it amplified even more if you just grab the conserve of this particle and just lower it. Sorry, not to 1, 2.1, so the particles don't have momentum, right? So they're just only going to move through the field. So they're going to describe, if you put it to 0, it's going to describe exactly what the texture on the turbulence field will, you know, is looking like. So my point with this is this pattern doesn't change. And that could work for some situations, but in most cases, you want some sort of result like this that gives you big kind of defining features on the particle motion, but you want that pattern to change. You don't want it to feel static and feel like the particles are kind of moving through over a surface or through, I don't know, like a tunnel or something. You want this thing to move a little bit. And there is an attribute on the turbulence field that will do always this for you. And you're always going to find yourself applying the same kind of expressions to it, or animated somehow. If you grab the turbulence field and you get the phase in X, Y, and Z, and these 3 guys are responsible for moving this texture. It's almost like the texture, well, it's almost the coordinates of that texture, X, Y, and Z. So if you find a way to animate this thing, then we'll see the result on this pattern. I'm going to put this conserve up a little bit more, go back to 0.9. Just do this so you remember. You can see that these guys are always going through here. This curve will remain, right? There's a few strays over there that just, you know, anyway, it will still get caught in a pattern. There you go. Very defined pattern. You can tell. I find this very cool for, even for like graphic design and art work of some sort. You know, this is very interesting shapes. And it's just one particle field, as you can see, nothing else. But again, let's just see the difference if we animate the face right now. So we just grab this. You can animate it with keyframes. But you know, this being an FX course and you want it to be FX TDs, then you probably put an expression and it's as simple, as easy as doing it with a keyframe. There's nothing to it. Just go to the attribute editor for the particles. Sorry, for the turbulence field. And then we're going to put expressions on X, Y, and Z right here. So right click, create expression. Remember just to copy this attribute, paste it, and then put something, anything that would just make it change over time. And the easiest thing, if you just want to test something, then just place time. And let's do it with one pattern, with one channel only. Hit create. Remember, if nothing comes in red, then it's fine. If you make a mistake or something, just put, for example, times. You hit edit, and it will tell you, well, this expression is not valid, and you got to go ahead and find what it is. And there you go. Perfect. All right, so let's see the difference. Let's just look for a pattern. Let's see if it changes, because we're only moving one of the coordinates or one of the channels of this texture, and we're moving it by time. Remember that time, or remember, no, maybe we haven't talked about this yet. Time is an attribute, as a variable that is already built into Maya. At time, it's going to return a number that will increase its size every 24 frames. So time will remain 0, okay? From 0 to 23 frames. On frame 24, time becomes 1. And then it remains 1 until you get to frame 48, and so on and so forth. So the change, it might not be strong enough for us to see it, but, you know. So what do we do in that case? Well, we just increase it. Right now, you see the number is 20. And it does increase, you know, in small values, you can see, but every 24 frames, it's going to jump, you know, 1 unit. So it is already a variable that, like I said, is built in there. So if it's not enough, then what do? We just amplify it, and let's multiply by 10. All right, so time times 10. I don't remember. Let me just think. There is a way here to make this text bigger, but because I have this keyboard, let me just no. Well, I'll find a way, how to increase the size of the text for the moment. But I think you can see it because this is very high-res recording. So time multiplied by 10. Hit edit, and let's see. All right, you can start to see already a bit how the pattern changes. Okay, you can kind of see it here. You see this curve? This curve is changing. And it's only on one channel, so to see a real change, we're going to have to do it in all three. So I'm going to edit my expression, and because I'm a lazy guy, I'm just going to copy this and paste it twice. And then I'm just going to put the same thing for the Y and the Z, and you can hit edit, and you can see that all three have changed. Let's see the difference. So always look at these curves and see if they, if they change shape, then it's working. I mean, everything is working. We just need to know if the values that we're using are, high enough or not. So it is mutating, but it's only mutating the same, it is changing shapes, but it's doing it a bit slow. So let's go ahead and tweak it. And I never like, unless it's for a particular reason, I never like to have the same values in all three channels. I don't know, maybe it's just my mind, it's already wired to randomize as much as possible. So we can just quickly randomize. How do we change these values in here? Well, instead of thinking of time multiplied by 10 for all three of them, I can say, for example, the first one, leave it as it is. The second one, just choose a different number. So, for example, time, let's say plus, 25. And then let's just increase the multiplier here. So by 30, then we multiply this one by 50. And then we'll do here time, for example, plus 8. And then we'll multiply that by 33. You can see just simply time is just like I just explained, is a number that is just increasing, every 24 frames. Here I'm just basically sampling the same time but 25 seconds ahead, right? And then here time but 8 seconds ahead, and then multiply each one by something else. So all three numbers now are different, as you can see here. So let's go back in here and then see what it looks like. All right. Again, for this will have a use for this kind of low, very, very low frequency. Okay, we'll use it for whatever it finds, whatever is your requirement. This could look cool even in a t-shirt or something. But this is not the kind of value so low that we're going to be using for a shot with a helicopter or something, more normal, let's say, not so abstract as this. But perfect. Let's just take a look. Then at home you will see it's even shifting, to the side and everything, but it is changing shapes. It's still a bit stuck in some of the areas, but that is because just simply we're using very, very low frequency. If we just double this, then the result starts to look more normal, more natural, let's say. Okay, let's keep going a bit higher. And the idea of this is not to leave, like I said at the very beginning, I'm always using two turbulence fields. So I'm using one with very low frequency, even at this stage, but very low magnitude. So it's low frequency, low magnitude, and I get, this starting to look a bit too noisy to me. But you see the idea? So you start getting those little patterns right here. Okay, but it's too noisy, so I'm gonna go and lower my frequency a little bit, just so I get back to more of a tender look, like that. Okay, and this is one of the fields that I use. Then I grab my particles and I create another one. So I use my turbulence, and this is gonna be my turbulence with high frequency. So it's going to have no attenuation, as always. A magnitude of, I don't know, let's say just 10 for now. And the idea of this field is to break this kind of lines a little bit. So you do get some particles are kind of moving towards these patterns, but then broken up, with the high frequency noise. So that way you can control a bit more of the shapes. You see, you just start breaking those lines up a little. And then play with the magnitude. So the frequency, this one is at 500, it's way too much. I'm just gonna put this to 100. All right, so it's more natural. So you can see it's a more interesting look than just having, now you start to see the animation that we have. So it's kind of wavy. Okay, it's more interesting. I still think we have to make a choice here. So one of the fields is still too high. The low frequency still is at 100, and the high frequency is only at 10. So we'll probably lower this one even more. Put this to 20. But look at the difference, right? Once you start playing with the magnitudes and breaking both of the turbulence fields, then you start getting a lot of cool results. So right now it's a lot more subtle. And we're starting to get in line of what we're going to be doing today, right, with the helicopter stuff. But one thing that is happening at the moment also is that my high frequency turbulence, the pattern is also stuck. We don't want that. We want to animate that. So you can do the expressions again, or you can do the lazy bit. So you can go ahead and copy this, and go into your high frequency, and then paste it. But of course, just change the word low for high. There's nothing wrong for you to do this, okay? For you to copy and paste it and change names. That's just, at the end of the day, what you want to work is faster and more efficiently. So this works. Then you choose what to do with this. If you can change the offset, right, and then just put something like that, and then you should be fine. So you get now expressions on your low frequency and your high frequency turbulence fields. Let's rewind. We haven't saved the scene, so just for the hell of it, let's just, sorry. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so let's just name this thing. We already had a scene name here, so lesson 3. Okay. All right, cool. So now we have the turbulence fields animated. We're going to have to probably increase our magnitudes a little bit again. So frequency high, just double it or triple it. And let's put this one as half. Well, let's leave it at 20. Let's see what that does. All right. You're going to find yourself always tweaking numbers. That's what we do most of our day. And just finding the right balance in between forces and between resilience and masses, and that's our job. So don't feel frustrated if you have to change the number 10, 20 times. You're just finding a sweet spot. Once you have it, then you don't have to think about that anymore for your scene. So there you go. So I still feel like this turbulence is too low. So let's just go ahead and put it to 100, see what that does. All right. Again, I'm not talking about the helicopter scene just yet. I'm just kind of showing you a bit of a natural feel or a way of working with turbulence, so it doesn't feel like just random noise. You can see that this has a lot more structure. And again, you can always break it by increasing the magnitude of this one. So here, this one will give you more tendrils. Perfect. And then this one will break those individually. So let's say to 200. All right. So keep that in mind, okay? Because it might not seem like much right now, but just to prove my point, if I grab these particles and then just connect a gravity field, and because of the scale of the scene, I'm going to increase my gravity to make them fall faster. So I'm going to put it 10 times bigger, and I'm going to hit play. And they're all falling at once because remember that we had when we did this shot with the birds, we had a set number of particles. Remember that we were using a max count to limit the number of birds. So right now we have here max count set to 106,945. So, we have that under control. Remember that we placed it, so we can just put this to -1. We need to fix that. Because you see that when I want to do with -1 is I want the particles to continue to be born and born over and over again. We set it to 0 because we didn't want our client to mess with this number and too much, right? So let's go ahead and edit our control. So I'm going to, modify edit attribute. I'm going to grab my swarm size, which is right here. And I'm going to remove this minimum, or leave the minimum, but leave it at -1. That way we can just say -1. And remember that when the particles max count is -1 means that it's you can have as many as you want. So right now what I'm trying to do with this is have particles fall. And right now we have way too many particles. So the scene starts to get a bit slow. So let me just quickly take my emitter and change my rate. Okay, this is more like it. What I'm trying to do with this, and I'm not going all over the place with this topic. I'm still talking about the two turbulence fields. And it might not seem like much when, when it's on a flat plane and they're not doing much, but once they start to fall, if you start playing with these numbers, then you start going from rain to snow to many things. And this is something that we're going to do in the next lesson when we go back into the planet Earth kind of setup. You see my point with this, and you can grab now your turbulence low, for example, and turn it completely off. And that's going to give you one result. Okay, so particles are falling a bit of in a straight line. And even more, you can grab your turbulence high and get rid of it. That's the beginning of just something that is almost feeling like rain with no wind or nothing. Then let's see the effect now on the turbulence low. Put that to 100. Then you see how they get a bit of motion in here. You start getting lines. So this will be very, very useful, and it should always be on all your setups. Then you can choose to use it or not to use it. That's up to you. But if you want my honest, like I always talk to you, my honest advice, try to always have your two turbulence fields set up with expressions. And if you're not going to use them, then fine. But most likely you're going to need it because of the way that what I just described. Here you start getting, cool bit of sideways motion. Then you start getting, you can kind of see the lines. And you can mix that with the other turbulence field, and then you start getting some interesting results. But we'll leave that for next week. So for now, I'm just going to get rid of my gravity field. I'm going to show my polygons again. And here we go. So now, okay, let's say that the turbulence field is covered for now. We're going to use it on every lesson, I'm pretty sure. There are my particles. They have nothing to do right now with the helicopter. So basically, I'm going to bring my two turbulence fields and I'm going to turn them off for now. So how do I turn them off? Just magnitude to 0. And you can see that I'm grabbing both at the same time. And because obviously they have the same list of attributes, then I can just tweak both simultaneously by doing that. All right, let's rewind and hit play. There we go. We got static particles on the floor. Perfect. All right. Okay, so now, as far as the fields go, then we haven't talked about drag, we'll talk about it later in a different example. Gravity is self-explanatory. Newton, we're gonna use it later. Radial, probably use it now. But I wanna go ahead and jump and straight up to the best field that you're gonna be using, the most commonly used, the most flexible, and one that kind of takes a little bit of each one of those and is all in one field, and it's called the volume axis. So volume axis field, if you click on it, you see what happened? It gave me an error right here because I have selected fields, not particles. So when you have something selected, Maya will try to apply that field to it, and I cannot apply the force to another force. So no worries, just grab your particles, and again, volume axis. There we go. So it creates this one. It has a bit of a different icon right here. And the volume axis field is just a combination of turbulence, radial, Newton, pretty much any of those guys. Directional, gravities, all that stuff is built into one field. So if you grab it here, it has a magnitude, it has an attenuation like all of them. This one, as you can see, comes with an attenuation of 0. As the name tells you, is a volume axis, meaning it has a volume, it has a shape. Right now you may not see it here because it's too small. But if I grab it and increase its size, then you can see that it came out as a cube. So once again, I'm going to hide my polygons. I'm going to keep it here, and there we go. Here's my volume axis field. The force will live inside this box. And this kind of locators on the center will tell you pretty much what's happening in here. So right now, you can always test it quickly. Just put your particles inside, and let's see what it does. Remember that at the moment the turbulence fields are set to 0. There's not much happening. Let's crank up the magnitude. Way too much, but I guess it gets the point across. Let's just hit play, and you can see. It's interesting, right? what's happening in here? Then the particles are being born off our surface emitter. Because we set the max count on the particles to -1, then they're always being born. It looks like the particles are going from the center away, and that kind of matches the behavior of these arrows. And when they reach the edge of the box, or when they get out of the box, they kind of slow down and stop. Let's just do it again with no particles. Here we go. So if I had you in front of me in live classroom, then I will ask you why. Why is this doing? Why is it doing all these things? Why is it looking like this? Well, and you will tell me, well, you know, they're moving outwards because of the behavior of these arrows, and that's what it's showing me, and that's true. Okay. But why do they stop? Why do they get to the outside the edge and then, you know, of the box and they stop? And you can see it even better if you look at it from an orthographic view. Perfect. All right, so you can see, let's look at it again from this angle. They kind of travel outwards and they start to lose energy, right? They lose velocity and they just stop. You can see? They're not hitting a wall, they're not hitting each other. They just lose energy and then stop right here. That's perfectly normal because, remember, we had our particles and we set our conserve to 0.9. So keep this always in mind, okay? So 0.98 is a number that we always use. If you set it to 1, remember they will continue to move indefinitely until something stops them with a force or with a collision. So you can see the difference. This is how far they get at a conserve of 0.9. If you keep going to 0.98, they will also stop and merge further out. And I think this is a good way to illustrate what the conserve is doing. Look at it, you know, try to pinpoint yourself at home, one particle, and try to follow it. Let's see one of those that are coming up, this one. You can see it starts to slow down, and eventually it just stops. So that's the conserve. It's losing a little bit of energy on every frame until eventually they stop. So that's perfect. That proves the point or explains how the conserve works and explains the fact that this force is only inside this box, or this volume. It has an attenuation. So if I set the attenuation, let's say to a value of 1, which is a lot, let's see what it does. So they stop closer. It's not because of the conserve of the particle, it's just simply the force inside this volume is getting weaker as you get away from the center in all directions. So perfect, there you go. So I'm gonna grab my force, I'm gonna set to, and it has a cool feature. I'm gonna let you play with all the attributes at home and go one at a time. I think that something's better if you just test it, right? Than me explaining each single attribute. But it does has a cool one here that it says invert attenuation, and I like that one. Let me just look at it. Invert attenuation, as the name tells you, then instead of the force getting weaker further away from the center, it's the other way around. The force is stronger as you get to the edges. So we can test it. So probably let's just look at it from the perspective view. It's interesting, the effect. So you can see that the motion, it's slower in the center and stronger at the edges. You kind of go on slow and then speed up towards the outside. I don't know, it might be useful for something. It's definitely useful. That's one of the things that I want to say. All right, cool. But this field has a lot more than that. So I'm going to put my attenuation back to 0. Just so I don't mess it up later, I'm going to take my invert attenuation and I'm going to set it to off, just to leave things at default. And then for the sake of this example, then, you know, you can change the volume, this volume shape. So if I'm working with the helicopter, I probably get away, or it's better for me if I have, instead of a cube, probably a cylinder. Right? I always like to leave things, you know, very clear for all of you. I know, and because I have told me online and in comments, you know, that I post a little bit of an update of when I'm preparing the scene for the next day. I usually post it on Facebook, so a couple of people. One is a good friend of mine, Sheldon, who's a pilot. And yes, I understand. He knows the dynamics of flight and everything, and he kind of made some comments and suggestions about how this particle should move and why, and it's perfectly fine, and that's the way it should be. And I hope that he gets to this course and he gets into the group, and then he starts exchanging ideas with you guys, because he has an interesting take on these things, right? From the perspective from a pilot, right? From the point of view from a pilot. Aside from that, then there's a couple of other people. Then the particles are moving in the opposite direction. It's not a problem right now because changing direction of the particles is just one number, as you will see right now. And like I said at the beginning, this is using just one field. I'm trying to come up with an example that is a cool example, and not like other people, other tutorials where, excuse me, where they place particles on a grid and then just move the particles with a field and that's it. I'm trying to give you something that has a scale, that has something relatable to you, that you can find reference and try to replicate it. But at the end of the day, we're not using fluids, and if you're going to work on a film, and we're going to do a helicopter taking off or landing or something similar to this, then we're going to be working with a fluid simulation. And I'm not talking only for the rendering side of it. It's because of the dynamics of the fluid container. So if I were to do this, and we're going to take over, this is the same example. Once we get to that point in fluids, we're going to take the same example, we're going to do it again, but using a fluid as a force field, and then you will see the difference. You will get a lot more interesting motion, a lot more realistic. But hey, this is something interesting for me to talk about this field. And I'm leaving it up to you, young creative minds, to go ahead and come up with other ideas and other applications. So I'm just saying that just for the hell of it, right? Just in case. We're not doing a hyper realistic or anything like it. It's just one field that can do a lot of work, and it kind of looks interesting, right? So anyway, I'm using a cylinder because it's a more appropriate shape, I believe. And then we're gonna play a little bit with the attributes. Like I said, it's a long list, and in this particular case of the volume axis, almost all of them apply to this one, if not all of the attributes. It's not like the turbulence with only 2 or 3 attributes are for this, and the list, you can see if you select the list, it's pretty much the same, but not all of the attributes are they apply to this force. But in the case of the volume axis being such a complete and interesting field, then yes, pretty much everything here you can mess with. What I want to do is go in here and then find the attribute called around axis. I'm going to set that to 1. And if you remember, we had a similar scenario when we talked in the first lesson about the different types of emitters. We had a volume emitter, and it's pretty much the same as this. Instead of emitting forces, it's just shooting particles out. It's pretty much the same. So here we go. Here's where you're going to make the decision in which direction this thing is going to spin. And then you will judge it based on probably your animation. So the helicopter, rotor is going in one direction, and this might be going in this or the other. If you just want to switch directions, there's not a problem. You take the around axis and just invert the number, and it will change the direction, right? Matching what's happening in the animation. And the bigger this number, the stronger this vortex is going to be inside. So this motion, okay, of going around an axis is the same effect that you will get if you use a vortex field, right? Just to point that out. So the vortex field, or the around axis portion of a volume axis field, is a vortex field. The volume axis field as well has something called a long axis. Okay, that right now is set to 0, but if I set it to 1, then this vector will tell you what's happening. So it's going to be pushing. It's doing many things right now. So it's pushing of this center axis. Okay, this is the center of the volume. It's pushing particles away, as you can see for all these arrows. It pushes them around, and it's also pulling them up. So if you think about this, then you get a vortex field, right, which is the one that makes this kind of motion. You get a uniform field pushing up, and you get what is called a radial field pushing away from the center. So you see what I mean? You get a uniform field pushing up, a vortex pushing around, and a radial field pushing away. So 3 forces already built in this one. That's what I'm saying, that is a very useful field. but it has more stuff. It also has turbulence built in. You can see turbulence right here. So you can set it to 1. And it also has a speed attribute. And the speed attribute is just the same thing we did with the phase. So the higher this number, the higher the faster the pattern of the turbulence will move. So it's very cool. So it's already that, I'm assuming that it has already an expression and everything set up. And this is a multiplier of how fast that thing is going to move. So you can see there is all these forces in just one little field, which is perfect. All right, so let's just see what it does. Let's just save it. Remember to save it. All right, so it's chaos, but at least it's moving particles, doing something. We're forcing this situation with the magnitude. Right, so here we go. We get something going on here. All crazy stuff. No worries. We're going to bring this back into normal range just by taking my magnitude and put it to 50. Like I always say in my class, I prepare the lesson. Just the way this works for me is I sit 1 or 2 days before each lesson. I see the topics that I'm going to be talking about, and I try to come up with something. I look at the geometry that I have, that I own, that I can give you, that I have permission to give you, and I see, well, what can I do interesting? So I don't have a list of values and set numbers and nothing. I just prepare, I just look at it, think about it, and then just go ahead and record the lesson. So I think it's more honest this way. So I don't have numbers set up yet. And this is what we're going to be going through at home. So I want to go, before, and then you go home and just try it again. So 50 is still too strong. Let's just see what 10 will do. And then remember, this is an overall magnitude. So think about this number as a number that is multiplying your around axis, your along axis, your turbulence. So this is like a master switch. Then you can go ahead and tweak each one of the behaviors individually and amplify these values. If you wanted to spin faster, then you go ahead and increase your around axis and so on, right? So you want less turbulence. So this is like an overall super main switch, right? That controls everything. So let's say what it looks like with 10. All right, that's more like it. And again, particles are slowing down when they reach the outer edge of this container. But that's fine. And I call that a container. That's just a name that I'm giving. It's not a fluid container. Again, I repeat, it's not fluids. It's just particles, simple particles. All right, cool. You need to come up with a camera. And because you're just starting, and for the sake of testing and all, don't go too wide because you're going to have to deal with too many things. For now, get a bit closer, tighter. Okay, let's just see. We need to stick to this to be able to see it better on the recording. If you don't want to see the field, then no worries. Just don't hide it. My advice, just try not to hide it. I've seen it before with particles misbehave if you hide the field. What I like to do instead is just make a layer and just hide the layer. It's not the same. The object is not hidden. It's just the layer is not visible. So that way you have a bit of a wider view and you don't have too many things in the middle. All right, I'm not feeling the rotations. Right? I do feel like this feels like a turbulence to me, but no worries. We can always tweak it. So volume axis, and let's go ahead and go the around axis and just triple it and see what it does. Okay, so I start getting a bit more of a sense of rotation. So that's good. Let me just zoom out. All right, but it still feels a bit forced. So we'll grab the volume axis field. I'm going to grab this around axis and I'm going to increase it even more. All right. Don't worry about the fact that the particles slow down at the end and kind of stop there. That's okay for now. Go crazy with this, right? So let's increase it. Let's see what it does. Let's just go to 100 just to play. All right, cool. It's interesting what you start to see right here. You start to think how particles work. Why do we have particles accumulated in the corners? Again, if we were in a live classroom, I will leave it there and see what you guys say. I'm going to give you another 10 seconds to think. Why do they stay there? And why these guys just shoot past them and they don't move? It's just because they are outside of the range of this field. So they're born and no forces are applied to them. These guys out here, they weren't born outside. They were born in here and they were pushed out by the strong force. So that's why you get this kind of thing. If you want to amplify, depending on the size of your ground plane and whatever, then you might want to increase this a little bit and include them in there. All right, so we're playing just with the force. We're just going crazy with these numbers. That's obviously too much. Just wanted to see what it looked like. All right, I'm going to save this. I was saying that don't worry about the fact that the particles slow down at the edge. Because anyway, they shouldn't live forever. Right now they do. They do live forever. They live forever because remember, this is coming from the example with the birds on the previous lesson. And obviously you don't want birds to just vanish in midair. So that's why we let them live forever. But in this case, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to grab these particles and we're going to change the lifespan. So instead of living forever, in this case, we're going to give them a random range. What's the range? I'm not sure yet. I'm just going to say the life of this particle is going to be 3 seconds base. And I'm going to randomize that by 1 second. And I'm going to see what it looks like. That's why it's good to work. Another thing, that's why it's always good to work with low particle counts at the beginning. You can see the feedback that I'm getting is 50 frames a second. It's very, very fast. That way you can quickly tweak your numbers, start to get into range, start to feel happy, and then you can increase the particle count. Keep in mind something. This is 50, so this is moving twice as fast. Once I play blast this thing, or if I were to render it without looking, keep in mind that they're going to move half the speed that you can see right now because of this. That's why it's always good to get this frame rate display. If you don't remember, if you haven't done it, then go to display, heads up display, and activate frame rate. All right, excellent. So let's see what this new lifespan is going to do for us. It's going to make the scene even faster because the particles are not accumulating anymore. They just live in there. They're probably not living long enough, so we can probably give them a bit more time. And I'm doing this on purpose, like this. I'm always telling you, stop your scene, your playback, rewind, and then play it again after every change. Yes, in some situations, if you're, for you to work faster, then you could do some tweaks. If you leave them particle selected and then you hit play, then you can, change a couple of the attributes here yourself. And you just have to wait for them to die and new ones to be born with a new condition. But I kind of like this. Kind of looks cool. All right, so obviously it depends on the camera. Right now they stay flat on the ground, so that we're not getting any of the long axis fields, from this volume axis. The long axis is too low, so let's probably try to increase this. And I understand, yes, this is not physically correct and whatever, but it's all right. We're just playing with the force. And I'm not saying the one force is going to do it all. And this is the assignment for you guys. I'm doing one field because it's what I'm teaching you today. You can see that the long axis is pushing them up, but it's not really doing a very good job with that. What you can do, what I want you to do for the assignment is to come up with a more realistic look for this using only fields. Those of you who have already taken my FX Power User and you're more advanced and you want to move on to fluids and all, you're welcome to do so. But I'm not going to entertain any comments on that in my recordings until we get to that point. I don't want to confuse the guys that are starting this. But remember, once we get to the fluid section, I'm going to grab the same example, we're going to do it again. And we're going to compare the results. What I'm more interested of you to do, for this assignment is to see how you combine forces. And I'm going to give you a quick hint, and I'm not going to talk about that part anymore, but I do want to see some results, okay? I want to see some samples. But what I'm thinking is to grab this, create, for example, another volume axis field. Okay, I'm gonna make it big. I'm gonna do this one as a torus, which is like a donut, you can see. Probably too big, too tall. But hopefully you can kind of see what I'm going through, what I'm going on with this, what I want to have in my mind. I'm going to place it somewhere in the middle here. This guy works the same way as the other one, so I'm not going to take an away from axis. I'm going to get rid of it, but I'm going to give it at a round axis. And this is pushing them in this direction. I want to switch it to the other direction. And it's telling you kind of what it's going to be doing with these particles. All right, so I'm going to place it right here. You get control over the section radius. Okay, so if you want to make it thinner, now you can make it taller. You see what I mean with this? Probably the section radius is too small. Let me just increase it a little. Okay, something like that. No attenuation, turbulence we can put a little bit. My magnitude on this guy, let's just set it to 25. And my around axis to -3. I'm not reading off a list, I'm just thinking of numbers. My idea with this will be for the main field to do what it's supposed to do, I'm going to lower its a long axis because it's way too much. I'm going to put it to 2. My idea is for the main field that we've been working so far to do its job of rotating the particles, right, and pushing them up a little. And once the particles start to get to this section here, then they get caught into this one, whose job is to give a bit of a swirl, a bit of an edge. And that's pretty much like the fluid container will do by itself, because the way it works, right, it will hit the ground and then push the particles, towards the edges. And well, we'll talk about that part later. But right now I'm thinking, combining these two forces, and I would like to see for the assignment as many as you want. Don't worry about efficiency. Don't worry about elegance. I just want you to see what happens. What you can come up with. Get particles. Think of them of leaving one field and then getting caught into the next and the next and the next, and see what it does. For the sake of this, we're going to put this field into the same layer, and I'm going to hide it just so we don't get too confused in here. Let's save this thing as always. Remember to save, and let's see what it does. All right. So I don't feel like the second volume axis, and you should label it better. Label it. Again, you can, if you want to see if it's working and what it's doing, just increase the magnitude a lot. So I'm going to see. There we go. So it is pushing them almost in the wrong direction, but it's kind of interesting, right? So it looks like a dry ice kind of feel. Look what it's doing. If you want to see them, here they are. So yeah, of course, they're getting caught inside, it's working, right? This is awesome. I always like to see this kind of results. It tells you everything you need to know. So the field, you can see the curve, and it's telling you what it's doing. I push the magnitude a lot. So the particles are getting caught in this first part, but then they're getting, pushed away because there's nothing to block them in here. There's nothing to keep them inside. As a matter of fact, there is. If you grab this field, there is something called trap inside attribute. And again, you will do a much better job once you have time at home, and you can experiment with a little bit. I'm just kind of showing you and giving you ideas. I'm just like the movie Inception, right? I'm putting this little thing in your brain and let it grow throughout the week. But there's something called trap inside. Let's see what it does. There we go. So it's very chaotic because the magnitude is crazy. Let's just go ahead and get into a more realistic number. It's hard to read it because, yes, they're moving way too strong. Just grab this. It's always a good idea when you're debugging your scenes, and well, I don't think there's a bug in this. Obviously, there's not a bug in this scene, but once you're tweaking your forces, try not to do them all at once, because you're gonna get you're gonna go crazy. So you can either set the magnitude, which I know is set to 10. I'm gonna put it to 0, and this force is pretty much canceled. And then we have just the outer force. And then that way you can see the effect of just the one. So this guy, as you can see, is way too strong. Look at what it's doing here. Okay, so I'm just going to see if I put a magnitude of 2, let's see what that does. So it's weird. You can see that the particles are freaking out, even though it's a magnitude of 2. Why not we just turn it to 0, make sure that there's nothing else going on in the scene, and there's something happening. You can see that there's 2 turbulence fields, and the magnitudes are set to 0. And why? Why the particles are still moving? This is great. Okay, so you need to come up with always, with your solutions and figure out why are the particles having this shape if the field is set to 0. If you want to see if there's something else going on the particles, there's another force that you may have forgotten. You can just select the particles, window. Remember to go to relationships and dynamic relationships, and you can see that it's connected to 2 turbulence fields and 2 volume axes. You can always set these 2 off. I already have them with magnitude of 0, so it shouldn't make any difference. Rewind and play. All right. I'm going to switch it off from the first volume axis. They still do that. If I switch it off from the second volume axis, there's no forces, and the particles are fine. So this tells me that the volume axis field 2, even though the magnitude is 0, is still causing this weird shape. And that could be caused, and the only thing that I can think of at the moment is because of the trap inside. Okay? So trap inside, if I set it back to 0, then the particles are fine. So it could be an issue of the particles are being born outside the volume, and because I'm telling them to get trapped inside this field, and Maya is trying to push them from wherever they're born inside and then to stay inside, and it just it's not really working well. So instead of you going into the who's and why and all that of the force, and then spending hours trying to debug it and come up with another idea and changing your emission pattern or whatever, don't freak out, don't worry about it, just don't use that. Don't worry, there's not a problem. We'll go ahead and tweak this a little bit more. So now let's put things back to normal. Let's go ahead and select our particles and reconnect them to the volume axis. These 2 turbulence, we don't need them at the moment, so I'm just going to leave them out. So right now, let's just recap and hit play and see what is happening. This is not moving because this was set to 10, and right now it's 0. So they rotate and then get caught into the other field. This field right here, its magnitude is 0, so we just try to put it back to 10 as well. Okay, perfect. Perfect in the sense of, okay, perfect, everything is back to normal. Because I need to see these guys, I don't want to get, caught up with this. I'm going to try something else. I'm going to grab this field and I'm going to crank up my around axis a bit more. I know that's going to push them away. I just want to see if they curve a little bit. All right, they kind of curve a little bit. And there are other things you can use. If you use, basically remember what's happening is the particles are coming in this direction. Let me just find a good angle to explain this. All right, so they're coming in this direction. They get caught, they enter this volume, which is trying to push them to try to bring them back, but they're gonna get shot away. They're gonna get out and get out of this thing. So basically what you try to do is find a way for this force field to try to keep them inside without using that attribute that I used, that freak everything out. There's another attribute, which is the away from axis. And you remember when we had it on this volume, it's getting messy, on the cylindrical volume, we do have it, remember, you can see that it's pushing them out. I'm going to turn that off, the away from axis, and let the particles be pushed out just because of the rotation. Just talk about that part first. All right, perfect. So we have the same idea, but now the force field is not, the particles are going to be pushed out anyway because they're rotating, it's a vortex. So I don't want the force field to be pushing them out anyway, also because it's just too much. So right now you get the sense of rotation, which is good. What we're lacking is the same, with this one. But if I use the inverse of that concept, instead of the center axis of push the particles away, what if I tell them to try to keep them in or pull them in? So if I grab my volume axis field that is the torus shape, and I take my away from axis, instead of putting it to 1, for example, which will push them away even more, what happens if I put it to -1? And it will try to pull them inside the center. So it's going to help me finish that rotation in here. All right, so let's see. Always save. All right, so it starts to feel a little bit more. I'm going to pull that force even more away from axis to negative, let's say 10. There we go. So see, they start to curve up. And you're going to have to pull them quite strongly, I think. You can see that now they're starting to, it's interesting, it's not perfect obviously, but it's starting to do something cool. You can definitely feel now the force, right? You can feel the rotation in here. Too much, right? But it does something. So you can see that it's working. So that tells you that if you want to keep the particles from finishing, you want to finish the rotation, then you're going to have to help them by pulling them inside. You can even try that on this other field, the center one, the cylindrical one. There we go. We could probably grab the away from axis and set it to, for example, -3. So both fields are going to try to pull these particles inside. This one, the second one, it was way too much, but now we know that it works. So probably -50. And balance them, and keep playing with them a little bit more and more and more and more. That is too much, but you can get the idea. There's the second one, okay, the one that is shaped as a torus, doesn't have enough turbulence. I'm gonna put that to 1. So break it a little bit. All right, the away from axis. You start bringing those numbers down until you find something that you enjoy. There we go. It's just to get the idea or the feeling that these particles are kind of moving away. Again, this is not a technique that you're going to be using for a big film or for a wide shot or anything like it, but if you had your camera, let's say somewhere around here, and you wanted to get a sense, remember that these particles have a lifespan, right? So they're not going to live forever. You're not going to see the whole trajectory of the particle, by all means. So it does something. I think it's a good moment for us to save the scene. I'm going to increase the size of this plane. This plane is this is the effects map. This is the emitter, sorry. I'm gonna use my ground plane. I'm gonna hide my emitter. There we go, so I'm gonna stick to my plane here. And I think it's a good moment for us to increase the rate of emission. So let's go ahead and add another 0 to this and start to see more particles move through this. The cool thing about this is that there are no collisions. The number of fields is only 2. And it's giving you something interesting. And there's something to talk about, in the lesson, something to play with. It looks like a plate, and that's caused just because of this force field, right? The second one. I want you to balance these things out a little bit. I don't want to spend an hour just tweaking numbers. That's something that you can do at home quite easily. So here we go. So I'm going to increase the turbulence on that one. I'm going to increase the around axis as well. And I'm going to increase my away from axis as well. Let's see what that does. right, that's interesting. Also, probably my particles are living way too long. The idea is for them to dissipate. It's interesting to see because it's definitely, you kind of get the idea. It's on a magnified scale. These are very subtle effects. As far as the shapes, right? This is very pronounced. It's like a massive thing. But this is interesting because you can, quickly see the impact of the forces and the attributes that you have. These particles are probably living too much, so I'm going to take away some of their life. Okay, so a lifespan of 3 with a random of 1, meaning that they live between 2 and 4 seconds. And that's more than enough, and probably too much. Yeah, that's more like it. Even here, I'm a bit concerned, but if I were to see this edge, I will do something different, but yeah, it's kind of cool. All right. Now, as far as particle types and all that, I don't care about the rendering. What I would like to see is the play blast of this thing. But there is one particle type that it works really well for this kind of stuff because it helps you describe a bit more of the trajectory of the particle visually without rendering. If you grab the particles, then on the particle render type, by default it's set to points, but if you set them to streaks, then you get this kind of feel. Which you can see, it's almost like giving you a bit of a motion blur effect for free on the viewport. And it helps because the particles, as they start to lose velocity, they get smaller and smaller. So they get bigger and bigger as the faster they move. So it's an interesting way to help you clean up the scene in case you have a particle that is just lingering somewhere. It shouldn't, but sometimes it happens. Let's just play it back. This is obviously the type of thing that you will mix with, again, if you were to do this for a shot, then you will use fluids and you will use other things. You still do a pass with points, with particles like this, to mix it in with the fluid, and that's always a good technique to use. But I like it. I think it does the right thing. It's very cool. Tweak it a little bit more, maybe the first field. The along axis probably will just increase it. Oh, sorry, I deleted the force instead of deleting the number. So the along axis, let's put it to 4. That will pull them up, remember? A little bit more. Excellent. Do as many particles as you can with depending on your computer, right? Depending on the strength of your video card, depending on the resources that you have, the amount of time that you have available. You can always increase this a little bit. That is what? 29,000. Let's just say 50,000. These particles here, in case you're wondering why do they shoot out like that, is just because the same idea. They're being born on the edge, so outside of the vortex, and they're just getting caught into the second field, which is definitely very strong. You can see the just pulling them out, and then they start to turn right away. So this is something just is fixable by just tweaking the size of the fields. I'm just eyeballing everything here, just to work a little bit faster for the class. So that's good. And now that, given the fact that you already created the 2 turbulence fields that we had before, well, let's connect them. So window, relationships, dynamics, plug these 2 guys that we know that they help us a little, and then bring in a bit of magnitude in here. Just put this to 20. put this to 40. It could be too much, but I don't know. Let's see. Having too many forces, of course, is going to be a mess once you start to tweak it. Once your client comes in and tells you, well, change this or change that, then if you're not really certain on what each one of them is doing, then it's going to be a nightmare. I'm just telling you to connect them just because we created them for this example and because they're there. But try to, I think with the volume axis fields, then we're more than enough for the sake of this course here, for this lesson. So here we go. Okay, so you get some edits in here. Again, once you do your homework and your assignment, just tweak this a little. Okay, make them, make it fit correctly. Don't waste any space. I don't know if this is the right way to go or not. As far as this attribute here, the section radius, so if I increase that, then it begins sooner. Probably you can put a bit of attenuation as well. Let's see, attenuation, we can put it to 0.1. It's just a matter of balancing and playing. I think if you spend a good hour and a half tweaking some numbers in here, you get even better results. Particles are below ground. Don't worry about them at the moment. There's nothing to worry about. If you were to render this, then you don't have to worry because they're below the ground. I will teach you later how to make things more efficient by killing particles that are not visible and things like that. But for now, for what we're doing in here, I think it's looking quite nice. If they can live a little bit shorter, even better. Probably would take another second out of the life of these guys. Also change the shape of the emitter. Right now the emitter is a rectangle and is placed in a small area. You can play with textures and all and break him a little bit more. So find an angle that works and tweak a little bit more. Right now I kind of, because I changed the shape of this force, you see it's a bit too much now. So we can probably reduce it. All right. Rewind and save it. So come up with some cool forces for the assignment. Come up with a good camera angle. Play blast it. If you want to go ahead and render, that's your choice, but I don't really care for much for the rendering at the moment. Just give me something interesting, something that kind of feels powerful. We haven't play blasted this thing. We can go ahead and do it right before we finish this lesson. A quick word of advice, because of some of the scenes that I'm giving you, they come from older versions of Maya. And mental ray was always in the mix, that's what we always use for rendering. Before you play, let's try to save as much as possible. As you can see, it's not a problem with Maya. It's just that there could be some leftover nodes in here. I think I deleted everything, but we're gonna see it right now. When you play blast, sometimes it could get funky and could crash Maya if there's something left over. But we're gonna see. We're gonna do this together. As far as the play blast go, if you want to fix the resolution of your play blast, you can always do it on your render settings. I think it's best. You find the resolution that you want. I think this is fine for now. HD 720. Then you right click on your timeline. You go to the play blast options first. And then here you choose what you want to do. The ornaments are just if you had a resolution gate or something, then it will be visible. You can render as a video file or a sequence of images. It's up to you. The compression that you're going to use. The display size, as you can see, is taking it from the render settings. So it's always better to set it on the render settings here. And I want 100% of what I said here. You could scale it even smaller if you want it, or bigger. Frame padding, I don't care. I'm going to save this as a file called playblast. If you set your project correctly, it will place it where it's supposed to be. So it will be under the movies folder of your project. So that should be okay. Play blasted. And there you go. So Maya crashed in here. It crashed because there is a mental rate node left over or something. Maya's trying to save the scene as an ASCII file, and it's not doing it. Maya's gonna crash. So that's why I wanted to tell you ahead of time. Just save your scene first. So let's wait for this to crash. No worries. Bring it back up and let's just debug this thing. And it's not much about debugging. It's just well, let's change a couple of settings and see until it works. It's just I'll probably look further into why or where's the node that is giving me trouble. But if you save your scene, there's nothing to worry. You can just always tweak it again. So what I find is the fastest way if you just open your options and let's do something different. Let's just, I'm not gonna save this file. Let's see if that does it. Okay, so that does it. Why is the big reason? I don't know. Why it crashes at the moment, but I don't care. What I care is that it works. The only thing that I'm noticing is I didn't select the particle, so it looked great. It looked kind of ugly. Let me just kill it. But here it is. It's always good to play blasted because of what I was saying earlier, right? We get a playback speed here, and then we don't know the real speed until we play blasted. When you play blasted, it's always better. I always like to do this because my main focus is on the particles. So rewind it. Play blasted. Here it goes. I think I will keep talking about those things in every lesson. When you get issues, when you get crashes or things like that, the best advice I can give you is don't freak out, don't get nervous, don't stress, don't curse. Take it easy, and there's always a solution. And if you remain calm, it takes a couple of clicks and you fix it. Freak out if you don't save your scene. That's something to cry about. But if you do the things like you're supposed to, then there's no problem. Another thing, if you want to animate the helicopter, okay, if you feel inclined to just give it some motion or have it take off, I think it's cool. And probably what you can do in that case is either parent or constrain your forces a little, and probably keyframe the magnitude so you turn off the field as you get further away from the ground plane. Constraining meaning that as you rotate your helicopter in any direction, then you will get the field to behave and move along with the helicopter. I think it'll be cool. If you don't know how to constrain or parent and all, remember, watch Intro to Maya for Dynamics, which is part of the FX Power User program, which all of you have access to it. And then there, Igor will talk about constraints and things like that. All right, so let's kill this. We should be fine. Let's see. Beautiful. I like it. Obviously, it needs tweak, but this is a class, and it's been probably an hour and a half. But with a little bit of more time and love, I think it works. It works nicely. You can keyframe the emission, so probably if you don't want to get particles being kicked all the time, just the beginning, you could do that as well. But I think it works. I kind of like it. So you get your assignment. I'm going to upload the scene with the helicopter only on the FTP server right as soon as I finish this recording. And I welcome your questions, your comments on the group, and I'll see you probably tomorrow with another lesson. All right, thank you very much, guys. Have a good one.